We don't want to turn poverty into a profession or the alleviation of poverty into a profession. We want solutions, and we have found over the last 31 years that the solutions always seem to follow the establishment of deep friendship. And that means that people who are there to quote-unquote serve are served by those who typically are seen as those in need of service.
Hello, and welcome to More Than Sunday, a weekly podcast where we take a deeper dive into the stories, themes, and questions of our faith. My name is Eric Chakowski. I'm one of the worship directors here at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. And with me every week is one of our associate pastors, Josh Fitzpatrick.
Hey, Eric. It's good to be here again. It is a beautiful fall day.
It is beautiful out. Actually, The weather has cooled a bit.
Finally.
It is October the 16th. That is my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday,
She's
Eric's
29
All right.
again
Okay. Well,
this year.
trying to do the math. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And actually tomorrow is Kyle Henson's birthday. Kyle is our producer, editor, the guy who just kind of makes everything happen, and we love and appreciate
the guy
Kyle.
who works his magic
Seriously.
to make what we bring to the table sound like we actually know what we're doing.
And I was going to say, if you think Josh and I are well-spoken, you should meet us in person and find out the real deal.
Yeah.
Because Kyle really makes it all, and really does a great job of crafting these stories together with our interviews. We have great guests, but Josh and I often struggled through.
We need Kyle. Let's just say that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So happy birthday to Kyle as well tomorrow. We are so excited about our conversation today. In season 1 on the podcast, we had Jonathan Grace. Jonathan was formerly a pastor at a church in Dallas. He's now at a new church, but at the time was at a church in Dallas that does a lot of partnering with an organization called CitySquare. And today we are thrilled to welcome the CEO of that organization, Larry James.
Today on the podcast, we are joined with the CEO of CitySquare, an organization that we're going to hear all about today. And we're excited to have Larry James on the show. It's good to have you today.
Great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, for those of our listeners who are less familiar with what CitySquare is, would you mind telling us a little bit about your organization and your role within it?
Sure, absolutely. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer. We have a team of about 150 members that work every day in the inner city of Dallas, primarily in East and South Dallas, battling the causes and the effects of poverty. We do that in 3 primary ways. We do a lot of direct service that I'll mention here in a minute. We also do advocacy around public policy that drives the wealth gap, as we call it, and won't be solved until policy changes. We're not going to charity our way out of this dilemma we're facing currently. It's too large. The scale is unimaginable for most of us. So we're into public policy work. And maybe most importantly, in addition to direct service and advocacy, we really come down hard on friendship. We try to blur the lines between and among all the people who come into our world. We don't want to turn poverty into a profession or the alleviation of poverty into a profession. We want solutions, and we have found over the last 31 years that the solutions always seem to follow the establishment of deep friendship. And that means that people who are there to quote-unquote serve are served by those who typically are seen as those in need of service. And so that friendship is magic in our place. We don't talk about clients. As a matter of fact, if you use the word client in my world, you probably get slapped naked.
Wow, okay.
We talk a lot about neighbors. We talk about friends. We talk about deep friendships in every setting. And sometimes people who come to us for service are shocked at the way we comport ourselves in regard to how important respect is. So we do a lot of different things. The seminal story of CitySquare, from my perspective, I'm working on 26 years there. When I first got there, I was given to operate a food pantry that was just kind of a typical well-operated food pantry. Our canned corn was mighty straight and never got out of that alignment. We had 15 to 20 volunteers monthly, and strangely, they all looked like me. They were white and they were old, and they were good people. They were sweethearts, but we weren't connecting to the people around us. We weren't very relevant. We had a task to perform, a process to engage, and a way of doing things that, while it provided relief to people on a limited scale and basis, it never really established the community that I had academically read about before I got to what was then Central Dallas Ministries. By the way, I've threatened for years to put an asterisk by my name on my business card that would direct you to the bottom of the card, which would say, "Beware, this man doesn't know what he's doing."
That's good.
My education is American history, theology, seminary, Tulane University, American history. I've never had a social work class. I taught one time at Pepperdine University, but I've never had a social work class. I don't know anything about business. The only business course I ever had was 10th grade business law. And so I'm just kind of feeling my way through still after over 25 years. When I first got there, I purchased a industrial strength fellowship hall size silver coffee pot because I'm a coffee fiend.
Uh-huh.
And as I was setting that up the first day I had it, in the first month of my employment, a longtime volunteer walked over to me, put her arm on my shoulder, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm making coffee. I like coffee. I bet our guests will like coffee. We'll figure out what's going on in their lives and ours as we share coffee with each other." She said, "Don't you know that if you make coffee for these people, they'll never leave?" So I told my wife that night that I thought we were about a half a bubble off plumb in terms of trajectory because these folks were established in their ways, and I was wanting to go a completely different direction. But I didn't know what direction to go in or what direction to head toward. I think the good Lord took mercy on me one morning. It was a summer morning, much like this one. It was hot. The interview room was full. I was interviewing people like I did every day we were open. We kind of all did everything at that point. And I had 3 lovely Hispanic families kind of arrayed in front of me for a group social work encounter, which I'm sure is violating every canon of social work from a professional standpoint. But I had these 3 families together so they could pool their limited English to overcome my abject stupidity when it comes to Spanish. And we weren't getting very far. I knew these families needed something. They were perfect strangers to each other. The kids were playing. The women were getting acquainted thanks to my ignorance. There's a lesson in there somewhere, I think. But we weren't making any progress. I didn't know what they needed. And Josefina Ortiz, at that time a 62-year-old grandma, came out of the grocery store carrying her groceries. She'd already been interviewed. I'd interviewed her. And I realized during that interview that she was bilingual. And so when she came by, I stopped her. I said, "Ma'am, could you please help me?" And she started looking over her shoulder to see if somebody was behind her because she was shocked that I would ask her, a client, for help. She said, "Well, sure, what do you need?" And I said, "Well, if you don't mind, I need you to translate this interview because I don't know what these women need." She said, "Sure." So she set her groceries down. She actually didn't translate the interview. She conducted it. She'd been there so often, she knew the ropes.
Wow.
She just me to play with the kids, and she just took care of the need.
That's so cool.
Paid some rent, paid some utilities, provided groceries, made the women feel like they'd accomplished something, made me look a whole lot better than I was, and she just took care of the situation. The 3 families left together. The kids were playing. It was just a wonderful moment. And, of course, I missed some of the wonderful moment because I was on my knees literally thanking 5 foot 1 inch tall Mrs. Ortiz for her help, not realizing how much of an answer she really was to my basic problem of reaching that neighborhood. And so she had the good sense. I didn't. She had the good sense. When she got to the door, she turned back to me and she said, "Larry, I could come back tomorrow and help you if you need me to." And I said, "Well, you can see I need you to for certain. Please come back tomorrow." And so Josefina came back tomorrow every day, virtually every day that we were open for 9 years.
Wow.
And she helped transform our whole culture. That afternoon, I went upstairs into my office, and there was a plate glass window on one wall in my office at that time over on Haskell. And I looked out that window, and I saw all these people just milling around, some trying to get on the payphone. Yes, we actually had phones on the streets back in the dark ages. Some trying to buy drugs, some trying to get away from those sales, some trying to escape abusive situations, some just waiting on the bus. But there were people everywhere. And in the midst of that kind of reflection, God spoke to me. And I was not raised theologically to expect God to speak. Once the Bible was completed, that was the end of it. God didn't speak. And God has not spoken to me very often, but he spoke to me that day. And he said to me, son, you really are a big dummy. And I said, yes, Lord, I'll acknowledge that. And the voice of God said, I want to give you a couple of reasons why this is true. Neither you nor I have the time to exhaust the list when it comes to your stupidity. But here's a couple of examples. You think you know what this neighborhood needs. You have no idea what it really needs. And furthermore, you can't know because you're not of it, you're not here, you're an outsider, you just can't know. And secondly, when you look at this community, you see only material needs. You judge it only on material terms. And that's not the way to look at anything for which I am ultimately responsible, God said. There's wealth here, you just haven't seen it. And I looked back out on the street and there was all these people who just needed to be organized. And the image of Josefina kind of descended there between me and the Lord. And by the way, just for the theologians in the audience, God's voice sounds an awful lot like my wife's. just for the record.
I was wondering who that was.
Is that just for theologians? Or yeah.
That's her name is Brenda.
Okay.
So the response we made to that was pretty stark. We took 45 days, 60 at the outside to kind of clean everything up. We changed our whole process. And we did it with one line on the interview sheet that people filled out. Right beneath where it said, is there anything about which we might pray with you today? We added the line, we need your help. Could you volunteer? And we did that to every single neighbor who came in seeking our assistance. So we created a tension, a power dynamic of reciprocity. And we really believe that if there's not reciprocal benefit in interactions of any kind, then they're not living up to their full potential. But if everyone's receiving and everyone's giving in an interaction in the middle of the city, we're on the right track. And so we went from having 15 to 20 volunteers who look like me who kept the canned corn straight to having 300 volunteers a month. And the canned corn has not been straight since. It's wild and crazy. And what transpired was a 24/7 think tank. And we have done what the community told us to do as they got involved in the work itself. And that really is the story. I had all kinds of reactions. One guy who was actually very instrumental in the founding of the organization said with warmth in his heart, you've got the lunatics running the asylum. And he said, I like it. I said, yeah, it works. The people closest to the problem know most about the problem, and if given the resources and the opportunity, will solve the problem or at least address it more fundamentally than I can. I bet I heard 100 times, if I heard it once, these people are going to steal us blind. And I didn't have an answer to that because I'd learned, there is some theft in this business. So I crafted my response. Finally, I realized, that's actually the answer. There is some theft in this business, but it's one of two kinds. It's canned corn out the back door to sell on the street to get food or drugs, or it's human dignity stolen at the front door. I'm going with a canned corn cartel. Because I can straighten those guys out and they can become my friends. No longer will human dignity pirates be allowed in this place, no matter what. And we've stuck to that rule over the years. But we got a public interest law firm. We have a medical clinic. We've developed over 1,000 units of workforce and affordable housing through our housing company. We manage 724 apartments or units of housing, permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless people. We've built 50 small homes right by our collective impact center on Malcolm X that houses 50 of the most expensive homeless persons to house in Dallas County. We work with Child Protective Services. We see between 800 and 900 kids every year who age out of foster care. That's really something. The average young person who comes to us for service and life planning, preparation for adult living, has had 8 foster care appointments before they get to us. So you can imagine the instability of that. We're still very big into food. We'll distribute over 3 million pounds of really high-quality groceries this year. Our food center at 1610 South Malcolm X is really a grocery store type environment. We also served this past summer over 300,000 meals to kids who had no summer programming where they lived. We targeted apartment complexes where the kids lived but had nothing to do, and we came every day with a summer lunch along with AmeriCorps members. We have 300 AmeriCorps members on our team.
Wow.
And these AmeriCorps members organize day camps literally every day for 9 weeks in conjunction with the meal that we served. We do that after school as well through our partnership with the Texas Department of Agriculture. So we're doing lots of stuff. We just were named a purpose-built community after the Atlanta East Lake model. And if anyone's interested in purpose-built, just Google it, purposebuiltcommunities.org, and you'll see what we're getting into. We're seeking to rebuild the whole neighborhood around the old Forest Theater. We have the theater under control. We've been given it. And we're working with the school district to create a creative arts laboratory in the old theater that will serve the needs of the children that go to MLK Learning Center. Everyone knows about Booker T. Washington Performing Arts High School. We only have 11 kids from South Dallas Fair Park in that high school. And that, of course, is because their parents can't afford lessons and instruments and all that. We're going to provide that for these kids and really going to engage the school in a very creative way. We're going to actually become a classroom of that campus. So that's an exciting partnership. The school district's really excited about it. We're thrilled about the challenge. I hope we're up to it, but we'll find out. One last thing, we have thanks to the First United Methodist Church in Paris, Texas, we have an outpost in Paris, Texas. It's just flourishing. They've opened an opportunity center there. Thanks to the Oak Park United Methodist Church in Paris has allowed us to use their unused gymnasium. And so Paris is really rocking and rolling. Wow. Thanks to Rob Spencer.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, so much to unpack there.
Sorry to talk so long.
No, that gives us
it.
a great flyover of all of tons and tons of things that CitySquare does and what great stories for what brought you there. One of the things that struck me was your conversation around friendship versus client. We've taken a similar stance with, for example, our school partnerships that we have and the reciprocal nature of that relationship,
right,
as you mentioned, and the importance of that. So we've seen the fruit of that in our own ministries and in our own partnerships. Many of the things that you mentioned that CitySquare is a part of, I wanted to touch on one of them. You've got several different kind of housing opportunities you offer. One of the ones that you mentioned, and maybe the one that has received the most press in recent years, is your community of tiny houses that you offer to folks. Tell us how that idea came to fruition and how it's continuing to work today.
Yeah, that's a great question and kind of intriguing story. We had come up with a plan to actually retrofit one of the old Dallas County jail buildings, which originally had been the La Cabana Hotel. Elvis Presley stayed there. The Beatles stayed there.
Right?
Doris Day's husband developed it. It was actually modeled after Caesar's Palace, but it had been turned into a jail. We came up with a plan because we knew it was going to be vacated with the arrival of the new jail to develop it for permanent supportive housing. But we couldn't make the deal work financially. W.W. Cruth Foundation learned about our plans to redo that jail, and they realized that we were not going to be able to do it. So they came to us and said, let's do something around housing first, permanent supportive housing, to prove up the public safety benefit of this kind of housing for really hard-to-house Dallasites in the county. And they made a very generous offer. For every $3 we would raise toward this goal, they would give us $1. And they also gave us a lot of support and accountability and credibility. So we went to work on that. We pulled together a coalition. We found a piece of property. BC Workshop Architects designed the property. 50 small homes, really cool design. Everyone has a kitchen. Everyone has a private bath. They're all detached. There's a kind of reverence for individualism set in the context of an architecturally pleasing community. Every house is part of a 5 or 6 grouping of homes. The architecture is really cool. It won an AIA Unbuilt Award. Turned out to be the hardest darn thing we've ever built. Mm-hmm. If an architect wins an award, be careful. So, because they're artists, 2015 was also the wettest year in the history of the state of Texas, and it really played havoc with our development. But anyway, we got it done, and we picked our residents by design. It was part of the grant agreement. We picked our residents from a list of 300 homeless people in Dallas County who were costing the county the most every year. And the average cost per year per person to Dallas County, not to the city or to nonprofits like us, just county cost, was over $45,000 a year to stay outside on the street.
Where do those costs come from?
Parkland, inpatient and outpatient, mental health services, inpatient and outpatient, what little mental health services there really are, EMS services, jail time, all the county costs. Mm-hmm. would accrue to these folks who, to live there, you have to be chronically homeless, you have to be disabled, which is true of all of our apartments, actually. But in this case, you also had to have a pretty robust engagement with the county in terms of EMS services, and you had to have been in jail. So we were actually screening people in and not out. And so we had one of the hardest populations alive to work with. The national data predicted, 25-year peer-reviewed data predicted for us that 85 to 87% of the people who live there would do well. And 15 to 17% would not do well because they would need what we probably didn't have to give them, which was robust mental health services, including inpatient. We have no mental health services in Dallas County. I mean, the number one provider of mental health services in Dallas County is the county jail. Like you can get well there, right? Anyway, so this has been a very hard project. It's gotten more stable month by month, but we have eruptions of difficulty because of the severe mental illness of a small fraction of the population. People always ask me, would you do it again if you had to do it over? And I said, I'd do it again in a minute, because the impact on the vast majority of people there is really phenomenal. And the project is high quality. Shelters should be required to have the word emergency in their title, because shelter should be emergency. When we opened 511 North Ackerd, a woman moved in who'd been living in a shelter for 13 years. She was in her 60s. Shelters should have a 90-day life per neighbor. So there should be a plan and resources to get neighbors from the shelter into permanent housing. But we have a shelter mentality in Dallas, and we count that as housing. Shelters are not housing. I'm a real simple guy. My theory is if I can't nail a nail on the wall and hang a picture, I'm not home. If I have to get in line every night to go into a place where I can lay down on a cot, I'm not home. The goal should be permanent housing for everybody on the street.
And so do these tiny homes, they provide permanent housing?
Permanent housing.
When a resident is interviewed and invited to have a house?
That's right. And as far as we're concerned, we begin with the premise you're going to be here 90 years.
Gotcha.
Any transition that takes place is because you decide to go somewhere else. We don't have any transitional housing for homeless people. Shelters perform a vital service, but the time a person is in a shelter should be compressed drastically.
So now this is coming from a philosophy of addressing homelessness that's referred to as housing first.
Correct.
Why is that a controversial thing, and how do you feel like doing things like this are kind of innovative disruptors?
Yeah, so housing first is for sure a disruptor, because the premise of housing first is if you're homeless, whether you recognize it or not, you're ready to be housed. We have found, and again, the research indicates clearly, that if you want to help a person turn life around, you can do it best from the solid basis of a home where the key that's in my pocket unlocks the door behind which is my life and all my stuff. The cost factor, the return on investment is just dramatically better if you go ahead and house somebody and then work with them in there. Our social work teams, we call themselves Neighbor Support Services, I always refer to them as concierge. They're working with the person in that unit to offer them all kinds of opportunities: financial coaching, opera tickets, basketball tickets, a way to get home to see mom at Christmas, health care, legal representation. Whatever that person in that unit needs, our concierge team is there to help. And then we also have mental health professionals on site to offer people groups and healing and all that. But the key is the person behind the door who occupies the house is in charge of his or her life. We don't have requirements. You have to choose to be involved. And you know as well as I do that if I've got a choice and I make it, it's going to stick. Much more likely that it sticks and becomes a part of who I am than if someone's imposing that as a requirement with a guillotine over my head of a 90-day limit or whatever.
Sure.
We've got it backwards in Dallas. We typically have limited the number of days a person can stay in a permanent supportive housing unit to the length of a program we're offering to get them out of it. And then the shelter, we have no limits there. They can stay as long as they want. It just should be flip-flopped. But that's risky, and it's also back to being reciprocal. We really believe in people. We believe that people who are homeless are just like us, and we could be homeless just as easily with 2 or 3 things happening to us, which when you begin to unpack the stories of my friends on the street, that's exactly what's happened to most of them.
So talking about people that are homeless, you recently wrote in a blog post that folks who are poor often live in this cycle of silence in which their lack of voice leads to even deeper depression. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that phenomenon?
Yeah, so at our Collective Impact Center, there's a big courtyard. I'm addicted to getting to know people. And so I wander around out there every day and talk to people. And it occurred to me recently that kind of the presenting situation is people are sitting around in a courtyard area resting. And most of them are by themselves. There's some clustering of friends. And most of them don't talk. Some don't talk even when you try to talk to them. And it occurred to me that that's because there's a kind of hopelessness attached to the street and a requirement to survive that's attached to being alone that sort of forces this imposed silence on people. But now when you pick at it, if you're patient and kind, you can open that up and people can begin to talk. I mean, that to me is the work of the spiritual side of our ministry, and it's the work of the church to allow people to introduce themselves to their world, to their larger world. I mean, Josefina is a classic example. Quiet little Hispanic woman and a very unassuming grandmother who didn't say much at all until she was invited into the process of making things better. I mean, when we were doing 511 North Akron, our big building downtown, I used to walk up and down the streets down there looking for homeless people. And if you want to turn the equation upside down, just walk up to a homeless person and tap him or her on the shoulder and you begin the conversation. It goes in a completely different direction than if they're panhandling and we're going to approach you. Approaching you to panhandle is a script, right? If I'm saying, hey, can I ask you a couple of questions? Game changer. Would you live in a building like this? What would you want to see in a building like this? Do you believe a building like this is possible? What's it like downtown for you? How are you treated by the merchants? Where do you go to the bathroom? Where do you get something to eat? It just opens up a new world of conversation. But we're afraid and we're too busy to engage people and allow them the freedom, at least in a moment, to tell us who they are.
So everything I love underlying, there's this stream of bringing dignity to people. Yeah. You've done some partnerships with Highland Park United Methodist
yes.
and projects with coffee shops on campus
yes.
that also bring dignity. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So we have a pretty robust employment training program, work paths, and we do culinary arts and hospitality, and we also do construction trades. We opened a cafe on our campus at Malcolm X, and Highland Park offered us the opportunity to take over the coffee service for their Sunday morning services and downstairs in the Crossroads area. And so we did. And Highland Park and CitySquare developed the space. It looks a lot like the cafe on our campus at Malcolm X, but it allows their volunteers and our trainees and graduates to work together to bring a really good hospitality experience to HPUMC. It's a hopping place on Sunday mornings.
That's cool.
There is so much more that I wish we had time to get into, but I want to make sure that we give folks an opportunity to find out more about CitySquare.
Sure.
And so if folks are listening today and they want to get involved or find out more information, where should they go to find out?
So you can go to our website at www.citysquare.org and go to volunteer opportunities or help us or whatever. I'm not sure exactly how it's styled there. They can certainly email me, ljames@citysquare.org, and I'll pass it right along to our volunteer coordination staff. We'd love to have any of the listeners here join us, come explore our world. We have a really good volunteer management team. We'd love to have any of the listeners come down.
And let me also point out to our listening audience that Larry is well published as well. A couple books that have made some waves and gotten some attention. One called The Wealth of the Poor, How Valuing Every Neighbor Restores Hope in Our Cities. And then a more recently published book is called House Rules, Insights for Innovative Leaders. And I know you can find them both on Amazon.
Correct.
Do you usually point people in different directions for those books as well?
Amazon's great.
Okay.
Or if they want to get it from me, they can just email me,
Okay.
ljames@citysquare.org.
Great. We'll have to have you back sometime to talk more about those books, but we do have one question that we ask every guest on the podcast, and that question is this. At this point in your life, what is one thing that you wish someone would have told you?
Wow, great question. I wish someone would have told me the true nature of faith and spirituality long before I had to lose my faith and then build it back, I think. But maybe I don't really want that. Your question implies something of great importance. And maybe by definition, you can't really wish for something you didn't get because you've got what you've got and it's working maybe. And maybe if it's not working, maybe that makes the question more relevant. I don't know. My father always told me to treat everybody with respect because you're not any better than anybody else. And nobody else is any better than you either. I grew up in a fundamentalist theological background. I wish I had been able to discover a different pathway sooner. But again, I can think of a million stories that resulted from my clawing my way out of that. So I wouldn't trade my life for another. Anyway, that's the best I can do with that one.
Well, hey, that might be as wise as anything to remember that the journey is what shapes us.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The experience is what brings us our wisdom and our character. And Larry, again, we thank you for your wisdom today. And even though you may think that everyone else in the room is smarter than you, I have a feeling that your wisdom is sought after in a lot of areas. And we appreciate it here today. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really enjoyed it.
I'm so fascinated by all of the innovation that we hear in Larry's stories and the work that they've done in CitySquare in addressing the plight of homelessness in Dallas. It takes someone who is innovative and courageous enough to bring those innovations to fruition to really make a difference. And you can see the significant difference that CitySquare has done under Larry's leadership. Speaking of innovation, there is a conference coming up on October 24th that is sponsored and hosted by an organization here called Helping Agencies Serving Richardson that will be all about innovation in the nonprofit sector. The keynote speaker of that conference will be Larry James, and so we'll be excited to hear from him, hear more insights about the way that innovation has impacted his own organization and the ways that he believes that it can help up all of our games as we contribute together to better our societies and our neighborhoods. For more information on Larry James and what he does at CitySquare, for links to his books, and also for a registration link to that conference on October 24th, we would just forward you to our website, which is fumcr.com/morethansunday.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of More Than Sunday. If you like the podcast, please feel free to share it, go online and leave a comment, or give us a rating so that others might hear about us. We've got a new episode coming out every Wednesday, so make sure you also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode. If you want to find out more about First United Methodist Church Richardson, you can find us online at fumcr.com as well as on Facebook and Instagram. Special thanks to Larry James for joining us this week, and make sure you tune in next Wednesday. Have a great week.